Chapter 20. The Burn. Part 2. At sea, Gulf of Mexico, 2 hours. Eduardo pressed enter. The command, a whisper of encrypted data, vanished from the terminal. It didn't need to be elegant. It just needed to work. The logic bomb propagated through the nervous system of 3 energy consortiums. In control rooms from Beaumont to Lake Charles, screens glowed with the placid green of nominal operations. The malware didn't break the system. It severed the senses from the brain, feeding operators a comfortable, recorded loop of a world that no longer existed. Native SCADA commands, no foreign binaries, living off the land. The operators would see steady pressure readings until there was nothing left to measure.
They're blind, flying a 747 with the windows painted over.
Mira didn't respond. In the reflection of the dark monitor, Eduardo saw her staring at the ceiling, her stillness absolute. She had already left the room in every way that mattered. For the next hour, the only sounds were the hum of the servers and the rhythmic groan of the ship's hull. Eduardo watched the raw data feeds, pressure telemetry that wasn't reaching any console in Texas. The malware held the operator's screens at a steady 84 bar, but the numbers he was intercepting told a different story. Pressure had been cycling for hours, a rhythmic pulse of stress the system was never designed to report. Thermal expansion, vibration, microscopic insults accumulating in the weld joints. Metal has memory. Tonight, that memory would become a wound. 030714. The sound came through the hull first. Not from the ship, from the sea itself. A low-frequency thrum that vibrated through the deck plates and into the bones of Eduardo's feet. On the secondary monitor displaying the feed from a deep-sea hydrophone array they'd tapped into, a flat line jagged into a scream. It was the sound of steel failing. Not a clean snap, a shriek, metal tearing against itself, crystalline bonds surrendering in a cascade that propagated faster than thought. At depth, water carried that sound for miles. Every hydrophone on the seafloor registered the dying.
Fracture. Eugene Island, sublevel G. The destined pipeline.
The opening started small, a slit no wider than a fingernail, but pipeline pressure did the rest. Internal gas at 1,400 psi met water at 1,870 psi of ambient crush. The differential shouldn't have mattered. The gas should have stayed contained. But the weld had been weakening for hours under pressure cycles the monitoring system never reported, and metal remembers every thermal expansion, every vibration, every microscopic insult. The fracture became a wound 30 feet long in under 2 seconds. 030747. The gas didn't erupt. It detonated into the water column. Methane at pressure behaves nothing like the lazy bubbles rising from a swamp. This was a white jet punching into blackness at 400 feet per second, a horizontal geyser that hit the water like a fire hose hitting concrete. The impact shattered the gas stream into a billion droplets, each droplet a bubble, each bubble wrapped in a skin of clathrate ice as methane met near-freezing seawater and formed hydrate crystals on contact. Eduardo brought up the sonar feed. The bubbles looked like mercury in the ROV lights of a survey vessel 8 miles south. Silver spheres trailing crystalline tails, rising in a column that bent with the current.
Look at that.
A note of clinical awe in his voice. He pointed to the shimmering visualization.
Clathrate ice. The gas is freezing on contact with the seawater.
But the bubbles didn't stay small. Physics doesn't negotiate. At 4,200 feet, ambient pressure runs 127 atmospheres. At the surface, 1 atmosphere. A bubble born the size of a marble at depth becomes a beach ball by the time it breaks the surface. Multiply that by millions of bubbles per second.
We're not making a plume. We're making an inverted waterfall.
The rising column was creating a chimney of chaos, sucking everything nearby into its upward rush. With it came the condensate, the pentanes and hexanes that pipeline operators called drip. Toxic, flammable, now atomizing into the water column, coating the rising bubbles in a film of petrochemicals, forming an emulsion that would poison everything it touched.
There's the poison.
Mira spoke for the first time in an hour. Her voice was devoid of emotion.
An emulsion that will kill everything it touches.
Eduardo didn't turn to look at her. He didn't want to see what was in her face, or worse, what wasn't. 030921. A new alert flashed. AIS data. The Pelican, a maintenance vessel, was 8 miles south of the rupture. Eduardo understood what was happening before the transponder vanished. Buoyancy requires density. Seawater provides it. 1,025 kilograms per cubic meter, enough to float steel ships and concrete platforms. But seawater saturated with gas bubbles has the density of whipped cream. The Pelican didn't sink. It fell. The ocean simply ceasing to hold her up. Her deck dropped 6 feet in 3 seconds. Her props bit nothing but foam. Her bow pitched forward as the stern lost purchase, and somewhere below decks, a crew member who'd been asleep in his bunk hit the ceiling. Eduardo watched the AIS signal disappear. Not a distress call, not a loss of power. The vessel simply ceased to exist. He thought of the casualty projections he had written for Mira's report. The numbers had fit on one line. He had looked at that line for a long time before submitting the document, then had gone outside to smoke a cigarette he didn't really want.
Buoyancy failure.
2 words. Surgical. Clinical. The language of someone who had already disconnected. 031147. 2 miles east of the rupture site, the gas column reached the surface in full force. The water erupted, not bubbles now, but a roiling dome of spray and foam, a fountain 50 feet high where the concentrated plume broke through. The spray carried condensate droplets into the air, forming a mist that drifted east on the night wind. Toward the platforms. Toward the flares that burned around the clock. A pinprick of light appeared on the satellite feed. A maintenance vessel, its engine running, its exhaust manifold glowing cherry red. The methane air mixture found its heat source and remembered what it was made for. The explosion wasn't large, just a sharp crack and a blue flash. But it was enough. The flame front propagated outward at the speed of sound, a ring of fire chasing the gas back toward its source. The surface of the Gulf of Mexico caught fire. Not a spill fire, not the lazy orange flames of burning oil floating on water. This was a gas fire, blue and white and roaring, fed from below by a column of fuel that couldn't be cut off or contained. The flames danced on the foam, found new pockets of gas, leaped and spread and merged until a circle of fire a quarter-mile wide burned on the face of the deep. Eduardo stood and walked to the porthole. The horizon glowed wrong, a blue-white smear where the stars should have been. He looked at it directly. 4:30. The first distress calls went out, then stopped. Then because the crews had given up, because the response coordinators couldn't find them. The data void. 79% of the pipeline network existed as coordinates that had never been projected. Emergency responders couldn't locate the isolation valves. Repair crews couldn't find the rupture site. ROVs launched into the dark, searching for wounds in a body whose anatomy had never been mapped. Eduardo pulled up the emergency response channel and listened. Voices overlapping in controlled panic, using terms like coordinate verification failure and asset location unknown. He heard a man in Louisiana say,
"We're flying blind, sir. We literally don't know where the pipe is."
He closed the channel. By noon, the Henry Hub had ceased to exist as a functional entity. Natural gas futures climbed in a vertical line that made the chart software struggle to render. 400%. The number kept updating. Mira stood behind him. He could feel her there without turning, the displacement of air, the particular silence of someone watching something they had helped create.
Look at the data centers.
He pulled up the grid load monitor on his phone. Ashburn, Virginia. The power consumption curves were stuttering, dropping, recovering, dropping again.
The cloud is evaporating.
There was something in her voice that might have been satisfaction, might have been grief, might have been nothing at all. 1600. The anchor's face had gone pale. She was reading from a script someone had handed her moments before, her eyes moving back and forth as she processed what he was saying.
Sources are now confirming what appears to be a coordinated terrorist attack.
The photos appeared on the screen. Marcos Reyes, Skylar Bolt. The images had been processed, shadows deepened, eyes sharpened, the subtle digital alterations that transformed activists into zealots. Eduardo watched from the common room, his reflection ghosted in the television screen. The difference between a math problem and a murder was that math problems didn't have faces. The faces would come later, on the news, in the memorial services, in the wrongful death suits that would name companies he had never heard of and executives who would retire to Florida with their pensions intact. His name would never appear. He had made sure of that. On the television, a graph showed the projected recovery timeline. 18 months. The analyst was explaining why, something about replacement parts for 20-year-old infrastructure, custom fabrication, the impossibility of repairs when you couldn't locate the damage. Eduardo thought about the pressure cycling that no operator had ever seen. The malware holding the screens at 84 bar while the real numbers climbed. The logic bomb using native SCADA commands, leaving no signature, nothing to trace, living off the land. He walked back to the cabin. Mira was exactly where he'd left her, staring at the ceiling as if it held answers.
The Pelican. How many were aboard?
She didn't look at him.
Does it matter?
It was an answer, just not to the question he'd asked. Eduardo sat down at the terminal. The screens still showed the recorded loop. Nominal pressure, nominal flow. A world that no longer existed. He could see the ghost of what had been real. The pressure spikes, the cycling stress, the weld failures propagating through kilometers of pipe. He should shut it down. Kill the malware. Let them see. But by now, there was nothing left to see. He closed the terminal and watched the dark rectangle of the screen. Behind him, Mira's breathing had changed. Slower, deeper. Asleep, or something like it. The ship groaned in its cradle of water. Somewhere south, the Gulf was still burning. Eduardo sat in the dark and did not sleep.